Welcome to the presentation of Women Justices of the Supreme Court, made by me, Susan Seidenberg, a youth service librarian at the Ewing branch of the Mercer County Library System. This video is geared for children ages, I would say about 9 to 14 or grades 5 through 8. What do you think of these 9 older men and women posing in red robes in front of a red curtain? Well, they are the Supreme Court justices, and I will name them for you. We'll start with the top row, and we'll go from left to right. So this is Justice Amy Coney Barrett. This is Justice Neil Gorsuch. This is Associate Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And our newest Supreme Court Justice, Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. On the bottom row is Sonia Sotomayor. Then we have Associate Justice Clarence Thomas. This man is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and his name is John G. Roberts, Jr. Then we have Associate Justice Samuel Alito, Jr., which comes from Hamilton, New Jersey, right around the corner. And then Elena Kahan, she's the Associate Justice too. Okay, why am I talking about the Supreme Court? Well, in Article 3, Section 1, it states that the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. Although the Constitution establishes the Supreme Court, it permits Congress to decide how to organize it. All of these justices of the Supreme Court interpret the laws. What type of cases do the Supreme Court take? Some cases involve people or states who disagree over the meaning of the federal law. Or it could be a group's action might take away another person's rights as explained in the Constitution. Did you know that the Supreme Court rules on about 100 cases out of 8,000 requests? Yes, what the Supreme Court decides can affect you and every other person in the United States. There are no rules for who can serve on the court. A president can nominate a kid like you to the Supreme Court because there are no age requirements. Most Supreme Court justices were lawyers or judges in lower courts. The Supreme Court hears many cases, and each justice gets one vote to settle which interpretation is right. To make sure everyone understands their rulings, the justices give their opinions, which describes how the justices came to their decision. If the justice is on the losing side, they can explain why they disagree. Now we're going to turn from the more factual to our first woman Supreme Court Justice, and her name is Sandra Day O'Connor. By the way, this is the Supreme Court, and this is the first justice. I should say the first woman justice, Sandra Day O'Connor. We're just going to move this. She unfortunately passed away in the last few years, and she was not serving on the court when she passed. In 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor was approved by a vote 99-0, with one senator not present to vote. She served for 24 years, retiring in January 2006. She was nominated by President Ronald Reagan. She had or has 3 children. Her parents sent her to live with her grandmother in El Paso to give her the best chance at a quality education. And she thrived at the Radford School for Girls and graduated high school 2 years earlier. Her time at Stanford Law saw her work diligently on the board of editors for the Stanford Law Review. From law school, she worked at the county attorney of San Mateo without any salary. Would you work for nothing? As they were quite some amount of prejudice against women in the legal field. O'Connor struggled to get a paying job. Steadily, she was able to prove her worth, working very hard until she was able to secure the position of deputy county attorney. Ultimately, she became a role model for young women across the nation and beyond, aiding our collective quest to bridge the gender gap. After serving on the bench for 25 years, Associate Justice O'Connor retired, effectively upon the confirmation of a successor, and that was Samuel Alito. Over here. Well, it's time to meet the second female court justice, and her name is RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was born in 1933 in Brooklyn, New York, from where I'm from. She was married, she had 2 children, and guess who did the cooking in her house? Not her husband. She failed her driving test 4 or 5 times. So she was more into law than she was to domestic duties. Well, her unwavering devotion to gender equality and women's rights. She was a graduate of law schools back then. There were very few women. Ginsburg found out that securing a job was a Herculean task. In fact, remember Sandra O'Donnell worked for nothing. This was primarily due to her gender, because she was female. Ultimately, Ginsburg was able to secure a job working as a law clerk for Judge Palmieri, a district court judge for the Southern District of New York. Her commitment to gender rights and women's rights led her to establish the Women's Rights Project as American Civil Liberties. In the 1970s, she argued several cases, including the 6 gender discrimination cases before the United States Supreme Court. She also served as a volunteer attorney for the American Civil Liberties Union. Throughout Justice Ginsburg's tenure on the court, to make advances of women's rights and rights of minorities, she was described as the leader of the liberal bloc of the court. She was also the first Jewish woman to sit on the court. Here's another tidbit that you probably don't know. All 9 justices shake hands before going into the courtroom and before discussions in their meetings. Why would they shake hands before a meeting? Well, even though they had different views, they still share the same important job. Okay, this Supreme Court Justice, her name is Sonia Sotomayor. I'll be just with you in a second. Thank you, Ruth. Unfortunately, Ruth is deceased right now. Her legacy lives on, though. Sonia Sotomayor is currently on the court. She was born in 1954 in Bronx, New York. She went to Yale Law School, Princeton University, and she was married but never had children. Now she's currently divorced. Sonia Sotomayor attended Blessed Sacrament School before proceeding to Cardinal Spellman High School on a full scholarship. She was able to study at Princeton University. While at Princeton, she was actively involved in students' activities and activism, working on many projects that helped Puerto Rican students. At Yale Law School, where she served as the editor of the Yale Law Journal, she secured a job as an assistant district attorney in New York District's Attorney Office. She worked on all sorts of cases, from lower-level crimes to serious felonies. In addition to her remarkable accomplishments, Sonia Sotomayor has served on boards such as the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, the State of New York Mortgage Agencies, and the New York City Campaign Finance Board. She even taught in NYU School of Law and Columbia Law School. Okay, up is another current Associate Supreme Court Judge, and her name is Elena Kagan. Here she is. Another brilliant woman. She had her education at Harvard Law School, Oxford, and Princeton. Good credentials. She is our Supreme Court Associate Justice, and she was born to Russian Jewish parents on April 28, 1960, in New York City, Manhattan. She attended the high school called Hunter College High School. While in high school, she was elected the president of a student body. In Princeton, she won the highest award, summa cum laude. And she also had many different platforms. She was called on the university authorities to end what she termed behind closed door decision-making approach. Kagan was served for 15 months as Solicitor General before she was nominated to be Associate Justice to the Supreme Court. Kagan's nomination was confirmed by the Senate in 2020, and the Senate voted 63 to 37 in her favor. 2 days later, Chief Justice John Roberts swore her in as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. It's interesting to note that prior to her appointment, she had no prior experience as a judge. With liberal notions of the law, Justice Kagan joined the court's liberal bloc, remaining unflinching in her support of issues like Obamacare, women's rights, same-sex marriage, and rights for minorities. Okay, Elena, we're going to go on to the next Supreme Court Justice that was appointed by President Trump. And her name is Amy Coney Barrett. She began her Supreme Court tenure in 2020, pretty recently. She was nominated, like I said, by Donald Trump. Prior to her nomination, she served as the United States Circuit Judge of the United States Court of Appeals. Justice Amy Coney Barrett is an alumnus of St. Mary's Dominican High School in New Orleans, Louisiana. After graduating high school, she got admitted to Rhodes College while she studied languages, English and French. This future justice of the Supreme Court then proceeded to Notre Dame Law School on a full tuition scholarship. While there, she served as an executive editor of the Notre Dame Law Review. Amy Coney Barrett clerked for Judge Silberman, a U.S. Court of Appeals judge. She followed that clerkship with another clerkship from Supreme Court Justice Scalia in 1998. She was nominated by President Trump, like I said, this is the third time, and she was confirmed by the Senate in October 2017. From 2017 to 2020, she wrote more than 70 majority opinions on the Seventh Circuit, including cases such as Smith versus Illinois Department of Transportation. She also maintained the preliminary injunction placed against President Trump's public charge rule that unduly made it a bit difficult for immigrants to secure visas into the country or residence permit to stay in the country. Justice Barrett will most likely be on the conservative bloc of the Supreme Court. Our last justice, woman justice, is Ketanji Brown Jackson. She was born in 1970 and has 2 children. She was nominated by the current president, President Joe Biden. After her nomination by President Biden, she received the thumbs up for the lawmakers on Capitol Hill. She etched her name on the annals of history by becoming the first African-American female to sit on the bench of the Supreme Court. Her confirmation in 2022, and on June 30th, she swore the oath of office by her predecessor, Associate Justice Stephen Breyer, to occupy the seat left vacant by his retirement. Associate Justice Ketanji Jackson is a former federal judge and public defender. She entered the United States Supreme Court with loads of experience, which began during her years as a clerk for 3 reputable judges after college. The newest judges take notes and answer the door and get coffee for the other justices. Another tidbit: Supreme Court is in session for 9 months, beginning Monday in October and ends in June. During recess review of cases and debate of cases, and they write their decisions, the president nominates a justice when a seat is available, either by retirement or removal from office or by a death, and the Senate must approve the nomination. I had so much fun researching and explaining the female justices on the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court. Thank you for listening.